how to choose materials for your tiny home and what are the budget-friendly options. First of all, when we're talking budget-friendly, you've got to break that down into two ideas. People tend to think of budget in terms of the cost I'm going to pay today for materials. But you want to think about budget a little more deeply than that. Budget's both what am I paying today, but what am I going to pay tomorrow? When it comes to buildings, there is such thing as too cheap. If you build it too cheap, in a year from now, you're actually going to spend more fixing it than you are the original cost. So you really want to think about value. How do I get the best value for the materials that I'm using it? Regardless, in this video, we're going to talk about what are the lowest cost materials you can buy, how to build tiny homes on a budget, and what are some eco-friendly materials that you can use to build a home. So let's first break down the different kinds of materials. The biggest cost you're going to have in a tiny home is your structure. That is your trailer, if it's a tiny house on wheels, or foundation system, your walls, your sheathing, your weatherproof barrier, your roof, and your siding. And there are a lot of materials and a lot of options within that you have to think about, and have to think about, if you're building a home on a budget or to be cost effective. But where to start? Well, first of all, you're going to spend a decent amount of money anyways, so you want to make sure at least you're getting something that's going to last a long time. In the US, the most economic way to build a home, generally speaking, is wood frame construction like we have around there. Wood is expensive, but it is generally cheaper and more eco-friendly than metal and easier to work with. So you've got your wood frame construction, right? Then you have your insulation that's going to go in that. You have your sheathing. How are you going to sheathe that? That's generally, you've got to have some kind of strength in there. Again, building stuff to code or building stuff strong, you don't have a lot of options when it comes to that. Where you start getting more options is your siding. What kind of siding are you going to put on? Are you going to put a cheap, T111 kind of plywood siding on that? Are you going to put a hardy panel or hardy board siding, a fiber cement siding? Or are you going to go something really high-end and exotic? Are you going to put real wood on it? Those are a lot of options that exist within there. That's one of your big costs. We like to focus on that value point, as I mentioned. Yes, you can do the really cheap plywood sidings, but you're going to regret that pretty quickly. You're going to have water ingress issues. You're going to have to replace it quickly, and it's just not going to hold up well. Yes, on the other side, you can do that, real cedar siding or some of the real exotic things. It's going to look nice. It's going to be really, really expensive. Today, and really fairly recently, there's been sidings that have come to market and are widely available and widely used that kind of hit a sweet point. They are relatively cost effective. Yes, they're not super cheap, but they're relatively cost effective. They're going to last a really, really long time, and they are readily available. And those are fiber cement type sidings or composite type sidings that we use, and I think a lot of people looking to create that value use. So that's one cost point when you're talking about that material that's low cost in the best sense of the word, both today but also over a long period of time. Then you get into things like interior finishings, right? And that can be another big cost point, and it's something that can quickly kind of spiral out of control. Oh, let me just add this, let me just add this, let me add that. When it comes to interior finishings at Clever Tiny Homes, we tend to use premium materials. And we do that because we're a very large manufacturer, and we can buy those materials at very reduced prices compared to retail. But if you're DIYing it or building your own, or a smaller builder, that may not be an option for you. In which case, you've really got to think carefully about what matters to you when it comes to those interior finishings and materials. What kind of floor, right? Are you just going to do a rolled out vinyl floor? That's obviously very cost effective. It's very durable, but might not be the look that you're going for, right? It has a cheaper kind of look. Do you really care about what the walls are made out of and how those are finished, what the lighting fixtures are? Cabinetry is one where the prices can vary dramatically, particularly if you're not buying in bulk. Windows are another big one. So you want to go through what are the trade-offs? What do you care about? What don't you care about? What's going to give you that best value home for what you're looking at your budget when you go through those kinds of interior finishing, interior type of materials? And that's going to tell you what you can afford and what's going to be the lowest cost given your budget, given what you're trying to do today, as well as tomorrow. Hopefully when you're building a home, you're building one that's going to last and have value over a long time. The other thing that comes to materials is eco-friendly, right? Building materials, construction is the most polluting industry. How do we think about eco-friendliness when it comes to building materials as well as cost? And when people think of eco-friendly, the first thing to think of often is, well, is it recycle? Is it made from recycled materials or is it recyclable? And those are important things. But there's another element that isn't often talked about, but is just important, which is how long is it going to last? And let me tell you what I mean. If you have something that takes X amount of carbon and X amount of energy to produce, and it only lasts 5 years, and then you have to replace it again. And replacing it has not just the cost of replacing it, but also the transport costs in terms of energy and manufacturing costs and replacement costs, all that, disposal costs, all that. And then you replace it 5 years again. That's nowhere as good from an eco perspective as something that lasts 20 years. Even if that 20-year item currently costs more energy. So there's something called life cycle assessments in the environmental world that is not a consumer term, but if you really care about eco-friendliness, it's something you want to think about because it determines or helps you think about really the overall eco benefit from a home. So our perspective is, if you're talking about eco-friendliness, the first thing is make homes that last a really long time, that don't require a lot of maintenance, don't require a lot of replacement, because that is ultimately generally going to be far more eco-friendly. That's one. Number two is make homes that are well insulated and sealed, obviously. So when you're living in it, as you live in hot environments or cold environments, as global climates continue to evolve and change and houses in different places, it's not going to burn a lot of energy to be somewhere that you live in. Those are kind of, for us, the first and second order items. Then you look at the actual eco-friendliness of the materials that you're buying. Obviously, there are some materials that are manufactured with forever chemicals and generally things that are bad. Fortunately, a lot of those are working their way out of the market today, and so you can kind of stay around that. As mentioned, wood is, when it's harvested from sustainable sources, is a good place. It captures carbon, and so wood construction is actually generally good when the wood is coming from a good place. That obviously avoiding non-sustainably harvested wood is super important. So those are just some of the things that you want to think about when you're thinking about how do you build something that's sustainable, eco-friendly from a material perspective. Longevity, think about longevity. Think about how that material is manufactured, the manufacturing process to it. And then ultimately, what is the material? Is it made from recycled materials? Is it made from carbon capture kind of materials? Or does it take a lot of carbon to make them? So that's a little bit about how you can choose materials for your tiny home in a cost-effective and thoughtful manner.